The stars were quiet, but the silence was not peace, it was fear, the kind of fear that spread across entire systems, where even the light from the sun could not chase it away. The galaxy trembled under the rule of the Varnak, a brutal race with eyes like burning coals and armor made of living stone. They moved from planet to planet, crushing anyone who dared resist their rule. Entire civilizations were wiped out like dust blown from an old table, and no one stood against them, not anymore. On every corner of the galaxy there were whisper stories that once long ago there had been a race not just strong, but terrifying, a race that brought fear even to the Varnak. But those were only tales passed from one frightened generation to another, told in quiet voices when no one else could hear, and even then most did not believe it. They said that race was called human, but humans were gone, erased by time or war, or their own madness. No one knew for sure, only that their name still made the Varnak flinch if it was spoken aloud in a forgotten edge of the galaxy, far beyond the trade lanes and war zones. A tiny ship floated through dark space, its only passenger a young alien named Laura. Her skin shimmered with light blue patterns and her eyes were full of questions. She was a Zelaria, a race of thinkers and seekers, and she had found something buried in an old data core, a coordinate deep in the silence. She followed it, hoping for knowledge, hoping for something the Varnak had misaid. Ship came to a stop before something massive and ancient. It looked like a moon, but it pulsed faintly with energy buried deep in its frozen heart. Was a ship older than anything still flying around it? Were rings of debris and dead satellites blinking quietly with forgotten code? Laura moved closer, her scanners struggling to read the signals. But she felt that something inside this ancient ark was still alive. Something waiting, something breathing. She docked carefully and stepped through a sealed hatch. The air inside was still clean somehow, and the lights flickered weakly. As if waking from a long sleep, she walked down a long corridor lined with glass pods, each one holding a figure, tall, muscular, strange-looking creatures wrapped in gray suits with strange marks on their skin. They were not like the gentle aliens she had met, or even the monstrous Varnak. They were heavier, denser, even in sleep. They looked ready to fight. One of the pods suddenly blinked a red light, then another. Alarms whispered through the silence, and Laura backed away, heart racing. Something was waking up. A pod hissed and opened, slow cold gas poured out, and the figure inside fell forward onto one knee, coughing, eyes wide with confusion. He looked around, scanning the room, and then his eyes met hers, and for a second nothing moved. The human blinked once, then slowly stood tall, his body scarred, his face calm but dangerous. He did not speak yet, only looked at Laura, then at the others still sleeping, then back at her. His eyes seemed to hold questions and answers all at once. Laura took a step forward and said, her voice shaking, "You are human." He nodded slowly, then looked around again, his voice low and rough. "How long have I been asleep?" Laura tried to explain the war, the fall of planets, the rise of the Varnak, and the loss of hope. She told him how no one resisted anymore, how the Varnak crushed all light from the stars, and how she had found the location of the Ark buried in forgotten records, and came alone, hoping for help, but not knowing what she would find. The human listened without speaking, his eyes hardening with every word. He moved to a panel and placed his hand on it. It lit up instantly, recognizing his genetic code systems activated. Around them, weapons, charged shields flickered. The Ark was alive again, because he was awake again. The human turned to her and said only one thing, "Then let us remind them who we are." Somewhere far away, deep in the heart of Varnak space, a sensor blinked once, then again. Something ancient had reactivated, an old enemy, something the Varnak feared but believed destroyed. A message was sent to the warlord himself, who stared at the blinking signal with growing dread. He whispered one word not heard in centuries, and it echoed through the halls of his black fortress. Human back on the Ark. More pods began to glow, the ancient systems humming with power. Laura stood beside the first awakened human, unsure if she had made a mistake or saved everything. His name was Ray, and his face looked carved from war itself, but in his eyes there was something more, something old, something unbreakable. The galaxy did not know it yet, but the cryo sleep was over, and the storm had begun. Ray stood still inside the ancient ship, his breathing heavy, his chest rising and falling slowly. As the cold air of the cryo chamber faded away, his muscles were stiff, but his mind was waking fast. Memories flowed like broken rivers, battlefields screamed, smoke faces he could not name, voices calling him commander, weapons firing, planets burning, then silence, then nothing. And now here he was standing in front of a blue-skinned alien girl with glowing patterns on her arms, who had risked everything just to wake him. Laura watched him carefully, unsure of what he would do next. She had only seen legends written in old ruins about humans, never seen one alive. And now he was here, walking, speaking, his voice deep and calm, but there was weight behind every word. As if each sentence carried a history of war and loss, he asked her, "Where are we? How long was I asleep, and what happened to Earth?" She explained everything she could. While they walked through the now active corridors of the Cryo arc, the Varnik came out of nowhere many cycles ago, crushing worlds, enslaving systems, wiping out resistance. Entire fleets disappeared without trace. No one could stop them. The galaxy lost hope. Over time, old stories began to surface, tales of a forgotten warrior race, humans who once brought fear to the stars. The Varnik tried to erase every trace of them, but some records survived, hidden in forbidden archives. Encoded ruins. Ray said nothing for a while, just walked, touching the walls as if remembering something. Laura asked, "What happened to your people? Why were you all sleeping?" And he answered with pain in his voice, "We were too dangerous, too powerful. We fought not just the Varnik, but everything. We became a threat to the balance of the galaxy. Even our allies feared us. In the end, we chose to sleep, to seal our weapons, to hide ourselves, until we were needed again. And now it seems the galaxy needs us more than ever." They reached a control room, where screens flickered to life, showing maps of the stars. Many systems marked red. Varnik territory, growing like a disease across the galaxy. Ray stood before the star map and stared for a long time. Laura pointed at the nearest world under attack, a mining colony once peaceful, now screaming in silence. Ray looked down at the console, pressed a few buttons, and the ship responded like it remembered his touch. Shields activated, engines hummed, weapons powered up. This was not just a ship. It was a fortress, a sleeping dragon with fire in its heart. Ray moved to a locker that opened with a soft hiss, revealing old armor, battle-worn and heavy. He stepped into it piece by piece, like wearing his past. His hands found a weapon unlike anything Laura had ever seen, sleek black, humming with energy. He held it with ease, like it was part of him. Laura felt a chill run through her, not from fear, but awe. Something inside her told her the Varnik had no idea what they were about to face. The ship lifted slowly out of the debris field, engines firing with power that shook the stars. Laura sat beside him in the command chair, eyes wide as Ray guided the ship toward the mining colony. Sensors picked up Varnik patrols ahead, but Ray did not slow down. He pressed a command and the ship vanished from sight, cloaked in silence. Ancient stealth tech humans had mastered long ago. Even the Varnik could not track Itas. They approached the colony. Screams echoed through the comms, people begging for help, explosions lighting up the ground below. Varnik drop ships rained fire from the sky, and mechanical beasts tore through buildings. Ray saw it all, his eyes narrowing. He said softly, "This ends now," and he jumped from the ship before Laura could stop him. Falling like a comet into the battle, landed with thunder, the ground cracking beneath his feet. Varnik soldiers turned to face him, expecting easy prey. But Ray moved like lightning. His weapon unleashed blasts that tore through stone and metal. His fists broke armor. His eyes burned with fury. They tried to surround him, but he was everywhere, moving faster than they could see. They had fought many things, but never a human, not like this. The miners hiding in tunnels watched in disbelief as the lone warrior tore through the invaders. Some whispered the old name, Sky Devil. Others cried with hope and began to fight back, using tools, weapons, anything they could find. The Varnik began to retreat, something they had not done in years, because they had never known fear until now. Back on the ship, Laura watched through the screen, her heart racing. She saw him standing in the smoke, surrounded by fire, bodies around him, breathing hard, but still standing, a storm in human form. She whispered to herself, "He is not a legend, he is real, and he is back." Ray looked up at the sky, his voice quiet but full of promise. "Send a message to the stars. Tell them we are awake. Tell them humanity remembers." And somewhere far across the galaxy, the signal reached an old satellite, one the Varnik never found, buried under layers of code. It opened and sent a burst of light into the void, a beacon calling others, a whisper to sleeping giants. The humans were waking one by one. Ray walked through the smoking battlefield, his boots crunching over shattered armor and broken stone. The air was thick with dust and fear, but he kept moving, each step firm, each breath controlled. Behind him, the colonists stared in silence, unsure if they were dreaming or witnessing something impossible. They had lived under the Varnik for so long, they forgot what resistance looked like. They forgot what power meant. Now, one man, one human, had turned an entire invasion force into ash. Laura landed the ship near the colony, her heart still pounding from what she had seen. She ran toward Ray, calling his name. He turned slowly, and she saw blood running down his arm, his armor scorched, but his face calm. She asked, "Are you hurt?" And he only shook his head. The pain meant nothing compared to the storm in his mind. He looked around at the scared faces hiding behind walls, behind rocks, behind each other, and he said, "Come out, we are done here. You are Safed." People began to emerge slowly, cautiously. They looked at Ray like he was a ghost. Some fell to their knees, others reached out As if touching him would wake them from a nightmare, he said, "We will not run anymore. The Varnik took your homes, your freedom, but they will not take your future. Not while I stand, not while humanity lives." An older alien stepped forward, his voice shaking, and asked, "Are there more like you?" Ray looked at the sky and said, "Not yet. But they will come back on the ship." Ray and Laura scanned the nearby systems. Many were under siege, some already fallen, others barely holding on. Ray pointed at a Varnik outpost, a communications center that spread fear across the region. "We take that down," he said, "and we send a message to every corner of the stars that their time is ending." Laura asked, "How can two of us take down a fortress?" Ray smiled and replied, "We are not two anymore." He opened a panel and accessed the ship's AI, a system called Archon. A voice long silent now returned. Archon recognized Ray immediately and began preparing data about Varnik weaknesses, ancient strategies, human battle plans. Laura watched in amazement as maps formed, weapons unfolded, drones activated. This was not a ship. This was a relic of war designed for one purpose: to break empires. Ray flew the ship toward the outpost using the stealth systems once again. They passed through patrols unnoticed. The Varnik never saw them coming. The fortress was massive, carved into an asteroid, surrounded by defense platforms and auto turrets, but none of that mattered when Ray fired the first shot. Blast came from a rail cannon hidden inside the ship's belly. It hit the main shield core, shattering the protection in one strike. Then drones launched from the side, slicing through the air with laser precision. They tore into guard towers, disabled comms, blinded sensors. The Varnik scrambled to respond, but it was already too late. Ray jumped from the ship, again landing inside the base like a thunderclap. His weapon tore through walls. His fists shattered steel. The Varnik commanders screamed orders, but fear choked their voices. They fired plasma bolts, but Ray dodged them with brutal grace. He moved like he had done this 1,000 times because war was in his blood. On Varnik general stepped forward holding a massive blade. He roared in anger and charged. Ray blocked the strike, twisted the blade from his hands and slammed him into the ground. The general gasped, "How are you this strong?" Ray leaned down and whispered, "We are what you tried to erase, but some things never stay buried." With the base under human control, Ray activated the broadcast system. Laura helped him record a message that played on every channel, every frequency across the stars. The screen showed Ray and his armor behind him, the Varnik flag burning in the background. He said, "My name is Ray, and I am human. We were silent, we were sleeping, but now we are awake. And we remember you burned our worlds, you hunted our allies, you called yourselves gods, but you will fall like any tyrant because we are not afraid. And we are not alone." That message sparked fire in hearts across the galaxy. Small rebellions began. Survivors picked up old weapons hidden for years. They began to whisper the name human like a prayer, like a curse. The Varnik tried to shut down the signal, but it was too late. The fear they once used to control others was now working against them. In the heart of Varnik territory, the High Warlord smashed his throne with his clawed fist, screaming at his generals, "How did this happen? How can one man bring so much ruin?" They said, "He is not just one, he is the first, and others may follow." Ray stood on the deck of the ship, watching the stars. He knew this was only the beginning. Laura stood beside him, unsure what the future held, but certain she would not turn back. She asked him, "Are you really ready for war?" He turned to her and said, "I was born in war. I was raised in fire, and now I will end it." Galaxy had seen many wars, many heroes, many tyrants, but it had forgotten what it meant to face a human. Not anymore. The cryo sleep was broken, the silence was over, and the storm was just getting started. The stars shifted slowly as the ship moved in silence through the black ocean of space. Every light in the distance told a story, some full of life, some full of pain. But Ray watched them with eyes that remembered things no one else did. Laura sat beside him, her hands moving across the console, trying to gather data from the last battle. The broadcast had changed everything. Colonies were rising, fear was turning into fire, and Ray knew that fire needed to be guided before it consumed everything. Garchon, the ship's AI, appeared as a glowing figure in front of them. Tall, armored, human-shaped, with a voice that sounded like thunder softened by time. He said, "Commander, we have intercepted new transmissions. The Varnik are gathering near the Vion Rift. They are afraid." Ray stood slowly, his armor clicking with every step. "Show me," he said. Screen displayed a massive fleet gathering dozens of warships, surrounding a strange black structure floating near a dying star. Laura asked, "What is that?" Ray stared at the image, his jaw tight. "That is the Soul Core, one of the last places where humans fought the Varnik during the end of the Great War. It was sealed and lost. No one has touched it since, until now." Laura asked, "What is inside that place?" Ray looked at her and replied, "Our past, our pain, and maybe the reason we went into cryo sleep." He turned to Archon, "Prepare a jump to the rift, full speed and cloak active." If the Varnak want our history, then they will have to fight for Itas. The ship jumped through folded space. Ray walked alone into the armory room. Shelves lined with old weapons, some of them older than this war, older than the galaxy itself. He touched a blade with no edge and it lit with blue fire. He touched a helmet, and memories came rushing back, voices, orders, screams, laughter, and silence. He closed his eyes and remembered what happened that day at the Soul Core, and why everything Chang'e humans had been winning, crushing the Varnak across every system, pushing them back with relentless fury. But then the core was breached and something was found, something the Varnak were not meant to see, and something the humans could not destroy. Ray was there when the command was given, not to fight, not to burn, but to sleep, to hide, to wait for a time when they could rise without becoming monsters themselves. The ship exited the jump and the rift came into view. Massive red energy swirled like a storm between two broken moons, and in its heart floated the black structure. The Soul Core, built from forgotten technology, older than anything Laura had ever seen. Varnak ships floated around it, searching, scanning, but unsure, afraid to enter. Ray smiled. They still remember, guided the ship through the debris, silent like a shadow weaving past patrols until they reached the outer wall of the core. He said, Laura, stay with the ship. Archon, monitor all channels. I go alone. And before anyone could argue, he was already out the hatch, drifting through the dark. Like a ghost entered the core through a broken tunnel, memories hitting him from all sides. This was where he lost his first team, where they saw what the Varnak truly were, not just conquerors but thieves. They wanted not just land or power, but identity. They stole technology, culture, history. They broke planets, not just to destroy but to erase. And at the heart of this place was something they feared the most, a record of the human mind. Ray reached the chamber where it had happened, a giant sphere floating with pulsing light. He walked toward it, placing his hand on its surface, and it opened, glowing with ancient code. A voice echoed in the chamber, soft and broken. Welcome back, Ray. Last of the line. Suddenly alarms blared through his comms. Archon reported incoming Varnak squads. They had traced the energy spike and were closing in fast. Ray turned to the sphere and whispered, unlock now. And the sphere poured light into him, data, plans, codes, emotions, pain. It was not just a weapon. It was a memory vault filled with every battle, every loss, every lesson. Varnak arrived, weapons raised, thinking they had trapped a single man. Instead they found a storm. Ray turned, eyes glowing with fury. His weapon hummed, and he charged, not with anger, but with purpose. Each move a memory, each strike a truth. He cut through them with silent focus, leaving only sparks behind. Back on the ship, Laura watched with awe as Ray fought not like a soldier, but like a symbol. The Varnak fired ships began retreating, something they had not done in centuries, and then the core began to shake, systems long silent, roaring to life, lights shooting into space. A signal going out to all corners of the galaxy, not a cry for help, but a call to arms. Ray returned to the ship, his armor scorched, his body tired, but his eyes alive. He looked at Laura and said, the Varnak know now. They were never ready for what we locked away, and now it is time they learn what it means to face the full truth of humanity. Far across the stars, deep in hidden corners, other cryo chambers began to flicker, lights blinking slowly, old systems waking, other humans turning in their sleep, waiting for the call. And now the call had come. Ray stood at the command deck, his eyes locked on the holographic map showing dozens of stars, blinking red lines weaving between them like veins of fire. Every line was a battle, every light a scream, and in the center of it all stood one planet, the heart of the Varnak Empire, dark, massive, and covered in metal plates layered like armor. It was a fortress, a symbol of fear and domination for centuries, and now Ray was going there. Laura stood beside him, her hands gripping the edge of the console, her voice calm but firm. Are you really going to face them alone? Ray turned to her and spoke with the weight of every memory behind him. I was the first to wake. I will be the first to step into their heart. I will not ask others to follow a path I would not walk myself, but I will not be alone for long. Garkin appeared once more, his voice steady. The galaxy has heard your call, Commander, and it has responded. Transmissions are coming from rebel fleets, civilian uprisings, and newly awakened human outposts. They are asking where to go. Ray looked at the map, pointed at the Varnak capital, and said, there they go, there soon. Hundreds of ships began moving, scattered forces gathering like a wave, rising from the deep. Broken fleets repaired old machines, reactivated small vessels packed with courage more than firepower, and in the center flew Ray's ship, black and silent, a ghost from the past, now leading the future Earth journey to the Varnak homeworld. Passed through hostile space patrols, mines, ancient weapons left to guard empty systems. Ray's ship danced through them, guided by Archon's mind and Ray's instinct. At one point they were nearly caught by a Varnak cruiser 3 times their size, but Ray ordered the ship to go silent and wait, buried in the shadow of a moon. As the enemy passed above unaware of the storm, Bellalura spent the quiet hours, preparing messages to the other species reminding them why this mattered not just for humans, but for all who had suffered under the Varnik. She spoke of unity of truth, of the cost of silence, and those words began to echo across calms, carried in whispers, carried in fire, carried in hope. When they reached the final approach, they saw the Varnik fleet waiting, black ships shaped like blades pulsing with red energy. Thousands of them, a wall of death meant to crush anything that dared rise. But this time something had changed. The Varnik waited, but not with pride, not with confidence. They waited with fear. A stood at the front of the ship, armor shining, weapon across his back, a symbol not just of war, but of memory. Behind him, Laura placed a hand on his shoulder. She said, "We made it this far together, and I will see it through with you." He nodded once, then turned to Archon and gave the final order, begin. The charge of the ship launched forward, engines howling as if singing an ancient song of battle. Behind it came the others, fighters, carriers, warships, even civilian vessels with makeshift weapons. They moved as one, breaking through the line like a spear. Through ice, Ray's ship led the way. Every blast, every strike answered with fury and precision. The Varnik fired everything they had, but the wave kept coming. Ray landed on the surface of the capital city amidst chaos, towers burning, streets cracking. As the ground shook with explosions, the Varnik fought hard, their fear turning to rage. But Ray moved like a force beyond time, each step burning with purpose, each strike echoing with history. He fought through their elite guards, past turrets, past tanks, past screams. At the center of the city stood the Varnik citadel, a fortress wrapped in shadow and steel, and on its highest tower waited the High Warlord, covered in obsidian armor, eyes glowing with hatred, claws stained with centuries of blood. He had ruled for longer than most stars burned, and now he waited to face the one enemy he thought was dead forever. He climbed the final steps through smoke and ruin, until he stood before the Warlord. Neither spoke for a long moment, only the sound of distant battle filled the air. Then the Warlord said, "You should have stayed asleep." Ray replied, "You should have left us." Alanathi clashed with fury, each strike shaking the tower. The Warlord faster than most beasts, Ray stronger than any machine. Blades clashing, fists shattering stone. The battle was not just strength but will, and Ray's will was endless, for every fallen planet, for every broken life, for every child that never knew peace. He fought with their voices in his hands. At last, Ray disarmed the Warlord, knocking him to his knees. The enemy gasped, "How are you still standing?" Ray looked him in the eyes and said, "Because I remember everything you tried to erase, and I carry all of it forward." With one final strike he ended it, not with cruelty, but with purpose, and the tower went silent. The Varnik saw their Warlord fall, and their ships began to surrender one by one. The war was not over yet, but the tide had turned. Ray stood atop the ruins as the rebel fleet arrived. Survivors cheered, banners of old alliances rose once more, and messages flowed through space across systems. Humans are back, the Varnik are falling, and the stars are free to breathe again. Smoke still floated in the sky as Ray walked through the broken halls of the citadel, each step echoing off the walls carved from metal and bone. Behind him came the sounds of surrender, weapons falling to the ground, voices raised in confusion and fear. The mighty Varnik, who had once ruled through terror, now knelt in silence, waiting for judgment, waiting for what the human would do next. Laura stood at the base of the tower, surrounded by survivors from every corner of the galaxy. Her eyes searched the sky, waiting for the signal. Then it came, the flash of blue from the highest point, the sign that the Warlord had fallen. The crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in breathless awe, the kind of silence that comes when the impossible becomes real. Ray stood there, armor cracked, one arm bleeding heavily, his face dark with soot, but his eyes sharp as ever. He looked down at the galaxy from the top of the world, and for a moment said nothing. He just breathed and remembered everything: the cryo sleep, the battles, the faces of his team, the weight of waking alone and leading others through fire. He knew this was not victory yet, but it was a moment of truth. Archon's voice came through the comms, "Commander, transmission lines are open. We have control of every Varnik beacon, every relay, every voice can now be yours." Ray gave a slow nod. "Patch me through to every system, every ship, every city." And when the channel opened, he stepped forward and spoke, not as a soldier, not as a killer, but as a memory come to life. Said, "My name is Ray. I am human. I was born in a world that burned. I was trained to fight, but I was put to sleep so the galaxy might live without fear. I woke in a time of silence and pain. I saw what had become of the stars. I saw what the Varnik had done, and I remembered everything they tried to say. Did not fight to rule, I fought to remind. I fought to show the truth that fear is not strength, that power is not cruelty, that unity is not weakness. I stand here, not because I am the strongest, but because I carry all those who fell before me. You do not need to be human to stand. You do not need to be armed to rise. You only need to remember who you are and what you deserve. And now the Varnik will answer for what they have done, but not with fire, not with more death. They will answer with truth, with justice, and with the rebuilding of every world they broke. When his voice faded, the galaxy did not scream, it listened. Millions heard the message, and something began to shift. Planets where silence had ruled began to speak again. Cities long buried began to breathe again. People who had lived in the shadow of fear began to step into the light, and the Varnik homeworld surrender became reality. Thousands of soldiers lowered their weapons. Commanders came forward, not in pride, but in shame, asking not for mercy, but for meaning. They had followed orders for generations without question, without soul. Now they saw what they had become, and what they had helped destroy. Ray walked through the war chambers, where plans of conquest had been carved into steel. He ordered them all erased. He said, we will build something new, not just for humans, not just for the few, but for all who have bled under this sky. No race will rule alone, no voice will be louder than another. We will lead not with weapons, but with memory. Laura helped gather delegates from every species, from burned planets and hidden colonies, from old enemies and forgotten allies. They came not for revenge, but for a future. Ray stood among them, not as a king, not as a god, but as a soldier who had walked through the worst of history and came back with hope in his hands. Together they formed a new council, not bound by blood or war, but by purpose. It was not perfect, and it would never be, but it was real, and it was born from ashes that once burned entire empires. Far above in silent orbit, other cryo ships began to open. More humans waking, some confused, some broken, some angry, but all of them hearing the same message from Ray. It is not enough to fight, you must remember why you fight. It is not enough to win, you must know what comes after. Ray visited every one of them, helped them stand, helped them remember, and when asked what would become of them, he simply said, live. He'll help guide, but never forget who we are and what we almost became. And so the human legacy did not become one of war, but one of balance, of fire and healing, of strength and restraint. The galaxy changed, not because Ray fought, but because he remembered when to stop fighting. Stars still watched, the stars still burned, but now they burned under a new light, a light shaped by memory, by sacrifice, and by the return of a people once feared, now followed. The galaxy began to breathe again, not all at once, not loudly, but gently, like someone waking from a nightmare, unsure if the terror was truly gone, but willing to hope. Maybe for the first time in 1,000 years, planets that had once hidden behind silence now opened their skies. Colonies that once whispered in fear now spoke in open air. Stars that had once flickered alone now connected through new trade routes, old friendships, and growing trust. Ray stood on the balcony of the rebuilt citadel, once a throne of war, now a center of healing. His armor rested on the wall behind him, untouched for weeks. His wounds had begun to close, but not all wounds bled. Some were silent, buried deep in the soul, and those took time. He was learning to allow himself. Flora entered the room holding a data pad, her eyes scanning updates from across the sectors. Food shipments had arrived in the Borean belt. Children were going to school again on the twin moons of Salva. The first Varnik refugee ship had been accepted into the neutral zone, and most surprising of all, two species that once fought on opposite sides now signed a peace pact, sealed with their shared memory of Ray's final battle. She looked up and smiled at him, and he returned it, not with words but with the kind of expression only someone who had seen too much could give, a soft, tired, but full look of someone who now chose peace over rage. There were still cryopods opening, more humans rising from long-forgotten ships, scattered across deep space. Some came out with questions, others with anger. Some refused to accept what had changed, while others embraced it with cautious hope. Ray visited each one when he could, speaking not as a leader, but as a witness. He shared what had happened, what had been lost, and what had been won, not with weapons but with choices. He met a young human soldier named Evan who woke, thinking the war was still burning. Ray sat beside him and told him the war was not over, but it was different now. We do not fight to conquer, we fight to protect. And sometimes the bravest thing to do is to stop fighting. Evan listened quietly and asked if there was still a place for him. Ray answered, there is always a place for someone who remembers who they are. Ray walked the old battlefields alone, sometimes not to mourn but to remember. He planted flags not of nations, but of names, names of those who had fallen before the long sleep, those who had never seen the galaxy they had fought to save. He carved their initials into the stone walls and let the wind carry their memory. Laura helped build an archive at the heart of the new citadel, a living library of every species, every story, every truth, not controlled by one voice but protected by all. Inside it hung the first blade Ray had used when he woke, and beside it the broken helm of the warlord, not as trophies but as lessons, reminders of what power becomes when left unchecked, and what courage looks like When it rises from nothing, the council continued to grow, more planets joining, more voices heard. And for once in galactic history, the table was not ruled by fear, but by purpose. Ray refused a seat on the council, saying leaders must come from those who stayed awake, not those who slept. He said, I walked through fire, but now it is time to light lanterns, not burn bridges. And the people respected him more for walking away than they ever had for standing. Time legends began to form, stories about the human who woke from sleep and shattered an empire. Some were true, some exaggerated, but all carried the core of what mattered, not his strength, not his armor, but his choice to fight and then to stop fighting. Some said he had vanished into deep space, others said he walked among the colonies in disguise, helping quietly, never asking for thanks. And maybe both were true. One day Laura received a message from an unknown outpost at the edge of the known systems. It simply said, we found another ark. Ray read it slowly, then smiled, not a smile of victory, but of understanding. The journey was not over, and maybe it never would be. Maybe that was the point. Maybe peace was not a destination, but a choice made again and again. Every day he stood beneath the stars that night. No armor, no weapon, just a man looking up at the sky, remembering the first time he opened his eyes after cryo sleep, remembering the fire, the silence, the fear, and now this, the calm after the storm. And he whispered, not to the sky, not to himself, but to the ones who might one day stand where he stood. Remember who you are, remember what we fought for, and never forget that even the darkest galaxy can hold light if someone dares to wake up. And so the story of Ray, the human, the soldier, the memory keeper, came to an end, not with silence, not with war, not with a throne, but with peace, and with a galaxy no longer ruled by terror, but guided by truth. Years passed and the stars kept shining, but something was different now. They no longer burned alone, no longer flickered under the shadow of fear. They pulsed with life, with connection, with purpose. Entire systems that once trembled under chains were now dancing with freedom, and in that freedom the name of Ray became more than just history. It became a symbol, not just of strength, but of memory and of choice. Children born in this new age were told the story not as a tale of war, but as a story of waking, of remembering, of choosing to rise, and then choosing to forgive. They learned that humans were not monsters, not myths, but people who had once burned too bright and had chosen silence over destruction, only to return when the galaxy needed not their fire, but their wisdom. On a quiet moon, wrapped in green forests and calm rivers, stood a small home carved from stone and light. It had no guards, no throne, no banners, only peace, and inside lived a man with gray streaks in his hair and eyes that had seen too much. Ray no longer wore armor, no longer carried weapons, but every time someone knocked on his door seeking guidance, seeking truth, he opened it with the same calm presence he had carried into battle so long ago. One day a young alien boy arrived holding a small device filled with old recordings. He said, I found these in my grandfather's ship. They are recordings of battles, of your voice, of the moment you ended the war. He looked up and asked, was it really you who did all this? Ray sat beside him and said, no, I only lit the first spark. It was the galaxy that chose to burn away the darkness and become something new. They sat under the stars together, and the boy asked, do you think the galaxy will ever fall again? Ray looked at the sky and replied, not if we keep remembering, not if we keep choosing peace, not if we keep telling the truth, even when it hurts, even when it is hard, even when it costs us something. Later that night, Ray walked alone to the hill above his home. The wind was soft, the sky wide open, and he closed his eyes and listened, not to noise, not to silence, but to the heartbeat of a galaxy that had once forgotten itself and now had remembered. He smiled to himself and whispered, let this be enough, let this be the start, not the end. Then somewhere far away, another cryopod blinked its lights, slowly turning green. Another human stirred from sleep, eyes opening to a galaxy no longer ruled by fear, but shaped by a legacy born not in blood, but in remembrance. And so the journey would continue, not with war, not with fire, but with a promise that would never fade end.